This is Dateline Wyoming, produced in the studios of WYO Radio. Dateline Wyoming is a weekly news feature highlighting community issues and events that shape our lives here in Southwest Wyoming. In-depth analysis and interviews with the people behind the headlines. Presented Sunday mornings at 7 a.m. Views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WYO Radio ownership, management, or those of our sponsors. Time will be made available for responsible dissenting opinion. And now, Dateline Wyoming.
The Rock Springs Historical Museum has been a permanent fixture of the downtown landscape since its construction in 1894 at a cost of $20,200. Since that time, it has served the community as City Hall, police station, and fire station until the current City Hall facility was built in the early 1980s. The building sat empty for some time until the Rock Springs Centennial celebration in 1988. Through the hard work and dedication of a group of volunteers, the Centennial Museum opened on June 4, 1988, after only a few months of planning and designing. Artifacts were loaned and donated by local residents, and the volunteers created many exhibits to show what it was like to live here in the old days. Because of the success of the Centennial Museum, plans soon began to make it a permanent part of the city. In 1991 and 1992, the building underwent a $1.7 million restoration to bring it back to its 1980s condition. Today, our guest on Dateline Wyoming is Bob Nelson, coordinator of the Rock Springs Historical Museum. That's Dateline Wyoming for Sunday, March 5th, 2017, coming up after this message.
Hey, at our startup, my team and I move at the speed of tech 24/7. Bottom line, I just want the news that matters. So where do I turn? My local radio stations. I want to hear from people who live and work in my town, people I know and trust. For the best entertainment, sports, news, weather, and traffic, anytime, anywhere, I stay local. Support your local stations. Text RADIO to 52886. Furnished by the NAB and this station. Message and data rates may apply. Reply STOP, opt out.
Our guest on Dateline this morning is Bob Nelson, coordinator of the Rock Springs Historical Museum. Bob, welcome to Dateline Wyoming.
Well, thank you, Tom.
Let's just start off with a little bit of history of the museum. I know its physical location is historic in itself because of the fact that it was the original City Hall built back in the 1800s.
Right. It was started in 1892 and finished in 1894 and was the first building in town to open with electricity. It also has the distinction of being paid for completely by the citizens. When Rock Springs was going to be officially a town, the citizens who had come to work in the mines decided that they needed something that they would own as opposed to the coal companies owning everything. So they raised money and hired an architect actually, and built the current building, which was used from 1894 until 1982.
And that has housed the fire department, police department, and so forth.
Yeah, it housed everything. It was the court, it was the fire department, as you say, and the police department and the jail. And then upstairs, the main gallery, we call it the main gallery, but the biggest room up there, which was the courtroom, has also been over the years a makeshift school, a makeshift hospital, anything that was needed for, they used it there. The influenza outbreak in the teens, the 19 teens, it was used as a hospital ward.
Talk a little bit, if you will, about the importance of museums. Why do we have to have museums?
Well, I feel that museums are necessary to know where we're going. If you don't know where you've been in your history and who you are, you have no sense of place. Why are we here? What is the reason that people came to settle here, and how did we then go on to improve the quality of life? So we go on forward from learning from the past.
And of course, Rock Springs and the area has a rich history of being the home of 56 nationalities. There's a lot of culture that's involved.
There's a tremendous amount of culture, and what's pleasant for me and enjoyable is the fact that the different aspects meeting in Rock Springs. And by that, you have the coal miners, which is where the 56 nationalities came from, because in order to staff those coal mines, there were 10 in the downtown area, the Union Pacific Coal Company needed to go around the world to see if they could bring people here from all over to staff their coal mines. So not only do we have the miners, but we have the outlaws. Butch Cassidy got his name in Rock Springs when he worked for the butcher. We have the cattlemen, we have the sheep herders. And then we have the railroaders. So you have a lot of different components coming together to make up this diverse community.
I mean, really diverse cultures that all came together in one particular community.
Yes, and they were all anxious to be here. The Union Pacific hit you talk about timing being everything. When they went to Europe to recruit, it was a time of unrest over there, forced draft, a lot of civil wars going on within small countries. So they could offer a better opportunity by coming to Rock Springs or coming to America. And it was ultimately Rock Springs, and all these people came and wanted to be American citizens.
It seems to me that the museum is really a living entity. I mean, it's continuing to grow, and as every day we add more history.
We do. It's one of the few places where you say, what's going on at the museum? It just gets older. But I say that with kind of humor, because what you're saying is correct. The building itself is our greatest artifact. And as history, every day that goes by adds to the history of our community in the area.
Where does the museum get its funding?
It is a department of the city. So we are funded through the city of Rock Springs.
And what kind of a budget do you have on an annual basis?
Oh, I have the lowest budget in the city. We have the lowest budget, and that's up for that's open to the public. It changes. We're just going through budget again. And because we're having a tight budget, everybody's having a tight budget crunch this year, and hopefully has been for a while, and hopefully that's going to improve. There's indicators from the state level that the budget's improving, but hopefully we try to keep it on a minimal budget as possible and still provide the service to the community.
What are your greatest challenges in keeping the museum going and keeping it live and vital and active?
I think the greatest challenges are keeping the local citizens interested in the museum, because when tourists come through, and last year we had 13,500 tourists come through, which is 2,000 more than the previous year. Tourists are great, and that isn't all tourists, of course, but we had that many come through it. But when tourists come through town, or come to a town, but it's specifically ours, they come to the museum and they're happy, they go through it and they leave. What you want it to, and what you need to cater to and be aware of, is these citizens, and have them keep coming back and be proud in their museum. So there has to be enough change to, again, draw in the local citizens.
The museum really has become a center for activity in downtown Rock Springs. What events do you normally have during the year?
We decided to do that to open to nonprofits, and in the past we've had all different things, from like when the hospital was seeking CEOs or doctors, they held their receptions there. They might again. Then when the college was looking for presidents, they had their receptions there. So any group that we have, last year we had the Democrats met there, and we opened to the Democrats and or the Republicans. We're not partisan. So it's any group like that wants to come down there and use the facility, because it is a great facility to use, and it's been there and has been the pillar or the cornerstone of the downtown since the late 1800s.
Provides a great venue for a lot of different activities.
It really does. It really does. I mean,
Do you have particular events that you have down there every year that are returning events?
What we do, I would say that the events that we have are going for, and they always fluctuate. You never know what's going to come up. But we always have the Halloween stroll that's put on by the URA downtown, starts at the museum on Halloween, hence the name. Then we always hand out cookies and hot chocolate on the lighted Christmas Day parade, or the Christmas parade, or the holiday parade, which is an evening thing. And those are the two basic ones that we have every year. Anything else that comes along, we fit them in.
How long have you been coordinator down there?
Well, I've been with the city since 2000. And I started actually in the weed and nuisance department for a year, and then I went over to the museum in 2001.
In that time, what kind of changes have you seen in the museum?
What I've seen is a larger support. I think that when I started, the museum was kind of it was not anywhere near what do I want to say, in the public eye. It was closed a lot, it seemed, and I thought, and the powers that be that agreed with me, that we should open it year-round and have a definite schedule and not close for different seasons. So we opened it Monday through Saturday, and it's 10 to 5 year-round. And so I think that with the increased activity there, as you mentioned, with the different receptions and functions we've had there, people are realizing more and more that we have a museum and that it's worth telling people about. who come here, and a lot of people now will bring their relatives here or bring visiting people here. So
it becomes a focal point.
It does become a focal point, and you start here again. Sometimes Rock Springs has not the best reputation in the state, which I've never understood, but sometimes when you see where we come from and what makes us Rock Springs, I think is a lot easier sell than to educate people on what a great place it is.
In your years with the museum, how has technology changed the way you're able to offer your services?
Technology has changed considerably, and I feel like a dinosaur. Thank God I have younger staff. But social networking has been really come into play. And also the computers have gone, even in the 17 years I've been with the city, it's come grown by leaps and bounds in the fact that now a lot of our things can be on the computer, our inventory, our collections, and our artifacts, but also the getting out to a different market through social media has been invaluable.
Is there a particular item or a particular area down there that is a favorite of yours that you really wish people could see?
Well, I really like the Butch Cassidy aspect. The fact that, and we're redoing that exhibit right now, because the history in Wyoming and Rock Springs specifically is that the history is fairly recent. The reason I like being in the history field here is because you can talk about things and actually talk to people who experienced it. The history is fairly recent. I like the fact that Butch Cassidy came back and was well thought of here, and there are people who remember him coming back from Bolivia when they were little children and who are still now in their 80s and 90s who remember him coming back.
It's a real touchable, seeable part of our history.
It is. It is.
Do you have a particular relationship with the schools in terms of providing access to the museum? We do. Every year, we, starting in May, and we started a little bit earlier this year, we do tours, and it's usually for the third graders. Rock Springs history is talked about in third and fourth grade. Rock Springs history and Wyoming history is third and fourth grade. So we get tours every year from those grades in around May, and we're booked pretty solid. So we do have a really good relationship, and if any of the schools want us to come and do a special presentation, we can do that too. So, how much of a staff do you have down there? There's myself, and there's Janice Brown, who is the museum technician at the front desk, and April Dr. Newland is the exhibit coordinator. So they're part-time. So you've actually got yourself in two part. Correct. I would guess then that means you do rely a lot on volunteer work as well. Not as much as you think. We have volunteers, but we are able to. We've got it down to a system pretty well. We're always open to volunteers if anybody wants to come and volunteer, but we don't rely on volunteers. Dateline Wyoming with our guest Rock Springs Historical Museum Coordinator Bob Nelson continues following this message.
My name is Tom Thornton.
And my name is Cindy Thornton. We're retired, and this is how we live united.
We decided to volunteer with United Way at our community free health clinic.
United Way is how we contribute, because we know our time and money are going to the right places.
Judging by the thank yous we get at the clinic, I'd say we're doing the right thing with our retirement, too. We're Tom and Cindy Thornton. We volunteer at our community free health clinic. We don't just wear the shirt.
We live it.
Give, advocate, volunteer. Live United. Go to liveunited.org. Brought to you by United Way and the Ad Council.
Dateline with Rock Springs Historical Museum Coordinator Bob Nelson now continues.
How do you go about getting exhibits and that? Is there a lot of donated stuff there? Everything is donated. We don't take loans anymore. I stopped that because that's difficult to just borrow something from someone, and the insurance is insane on those. But so we take donations, and this community is incredible for donating things. Usually at a museum, and ours is really no exception, what you see out on the floor is only 5 to 10% of the collection itself. The rest is in storage. So again, with social media, you're reaching a market that's worldwide. So you can get donations coming from all over when people read about you and say, well, my grandfather lived there or something, and I've got something from Rock Springs. Would you like it? And they'll send it to you. But again, I can't stress enough how the local citizens of the town have been really, really supportive in giving us things that they feel, and we do, and feel are pertinent to the history here. You have collections in just a
percentage of those are actually on display.
Right.
Do you go through and change those?
That's a good question. We have certain permanent exhibits on the coal mining, for instance, and the armed forces. So we go through and tweak those. But the other ones are rotating. You try to rotate enough to keep, again, that's where it comes to keeping the local citizens interested, the local patrons and citizens interested in coming in if they know there's going to be something different and know that things change. But there are certain ones that I feel, and the board feels, are very important as to keeping with our history.
You mentioned the board. Talk about your structure a little bit.
Well, we have an advisory board, a museum board, and it's got 7 people on it. And we meet the second Wednesday of every month at the museum just to go over things and see what's happened, the correspondence, the tours, and that type of thing. And right now the board is working on a board project of, it's about ready to send to the printer, and it's going to be a cemetery self-guided walking tour. And we have the board in the past has done the downtown self-guided walking tour, which is a map, and it follows all the buildings and the historic buildings. The downtown of Rock Springs, by the way, the museum is on the Historic National Register, but the downtown of Rock Springs is on as a downtown, not as individual buildings except for the museum, and the city hall, basically, museum city hall. But the whole downtown is a historic area. Anyway, so we have a walking tour on that. So the board thought it would be a good idea if we picked out certain notables from the cemetery and had a walking tour for that, where you walk to each different graves and look at each headstone and that type of thing, and see some of the notable citizens who have lived here.
It's interesting to go through cemeteries and just read headstones, but that's going to highlight particular people and
yes,
from the historical past.
And at this moment, and I'm probably tipping my hand, but for the grand opening, we're going to work with the Actors Mission and do some type of a fundraiser where that when the tour is unveiled, as it were, each entry in the cemetery walking tour will be performed by a person from the Actors Studio, the Actors Mission.
How many people historically are involved in that?
Well, the people we've picked so far are about 35
About
people.
30.
Yeah. So it's going to be difficult too, because you try to pick and choose as to who you feel is important or feel has a good story
that contributes to the historical
aspect, and you're not trying to ignore anybody. But it's also written, and we got Barbara Smith to help us write it, and she wrote it in first person, so it feels as if the person is speaking to you, which is she did an excellent job on that.
What's the time frame on that project?
Well, we're hoping to have that done in the fall.
By next fall?
Yeah.
If there was one thing you would like people to know, the citizens of the area to know about the museum that they may not be aware of, what would that be?
Here is the fact that human nature does not change through time. So by that I mean what makes you laugh, what makes you cry, what makes you happy, what makes you sad stays the same. What changes is the technology around you. So if you are in, say, junior high, and you come home from school on a Friday, and your parents say to you, we're moving west, it doesn't matter if you're moving in a minivan or a covered wagon. Your reaction as a 7th grader is probably going to be about the same, saying, well, where are we going? We don't know anybody there. All my friends are here. Grandpa and Grandma are here. And what I want people to realize is that history then is much more relatable. If you can think about it that way, your reaction is probably going to be the same reaction that the people 100 years ago had.
It just depends on the culture and events going on around you
exactly.
at the time.
And one of the best ones for this area are the wives, and it happens to be a lot of wives, or you could say spouses now, who were brought to the area. The reactions from 100 years ago to like 2 weeks ago are almost the same verbatim. Why did you bring me here? Why am I here in this cold, windy area? And then also the majority of them will come to say this is one of the best places they've ever lived. Now, what I want to get back to your question is, so if everybody can see that history did not happen to people over there, it happened to us, history then becomes much more relatable, and there is such an abundance of recent history here that everyone has a story and everyone has something to tell everyone else. So if you can realize that, history becomes much more fascinating then.
And it's all a part of who we really are.
It's all a part of who we really are and the fabric of who we really are, but specifically our area.
What would you like to see happen with the museum in the next 5 years?
I would like to see some more electronic exhibits where you would walk in and be able to, say, press a button, basically, to really simplify it, press a button and have it speak to you. I would like to see more of that.
Which would relate back to specific events and so forth.
Right. Specific events in time. And I think that if you can get some of these events that happened here in the voice of somebody who was there, I think it's much more effective. And then also, that brings me into my mind of the Chinese Massacre Monument, which the board did too this last year. And it's a boulder with a bronze plaque commemorating the 28 Chinese who were killed in the massacre, and the board had that installed, and that's on the corner of M Street, Pilot Butte, and Bridger Avenue, and it's on the edge of the original Chinatown. Now, if there's a way then to tie back in that you could get that done, get that on social media, or get that, we do have it on Facebook, but that's a static thing. So somehow to make that more of a live exhibit.
Time always seems to give us a better perspective of the importance of events. But do you see things happening today that in 25 years we'll be looking back at and maybe having exhibits and so forth in the museum?
I do, and that's part of what I don't want to say, the duty of a museum now is to not only collect things from when you think like 100 years ago, but you have to take things now, be aware of collecting things that will just serve that purpose, what you're just talking about. So if I look at things that I grew up with, or even that I use now in my life, to think ahead and say we need that to preserve that for the future, and then have exhibits on that. So many people come in and say, I used that as a child. It can't be that old.
How important can a hula hoop be?
Exactly. The hula hoop now has become very important. And we have an exhibit up now on Snow Day. So you've got Chinese checkers in there. You've got checkers in there. So you've got a Monopoly game. Well, they still play Monopoly today. So you want the updated Monopoly game, if we take it in today, in 10 to 15 years, it's going to be old. So you want to make sure that you've covered that. And so you have to plan ahead. So it's an interesting, it's a fine tightrope.
There's the dynamic of what was and what is and
Exactly.
what will be.
Right.
What drives Bob Nelson to get up and go to work every day? Why do you feel this is important?
I like talking to people. I have a good job. I'm paid to talk to people about the history of the area and how we got here. And so far, most people listen or talk back. So I am so fascinated by this recent history that exists here. If you go out to the trails, which are up in Farson, the majority of them, one goes through here, and you park with your car behind you, you are seeing the same vistas that the pioneers saw 100 years ago. And I find that intoxicating. I really do. I find that the fact that you can walk on these trails and there's nothing else around you, no commercialism. So the fact that exists here, and we have that opportunity here because of the nature of the landscape and how few people are here, I find that's what another driving force for me. You can find these things and actually feel, like I said before, you can feel kind of what they felt. I can look at this and go, oh my gosh, it's hot in here, and it's hot out here, and look at how long that is. I can get back in my car. Those other people, those settlers, had to keep going or stop. So you can really, for me, it's a relatable experience.
It all has some impact on who we are today. Mm-hmm. In one way or another.
And it's still achievable. It's still touchable, as it were, that past, to kind of understand it as much as you can from looking on it.
I would imagine from what you've said in a couple of instances here today in our conversation that relationships with different entities within the community are really important. You mentioned the Actors Commission, you mentioned the school system and so forth.
They are very, very important because everybody, again, contributes to the whole. So what we are doing is museums preserve the whole of the area or wherever they are, and everybody contributes to that. So not to have these partnerships is kind of a foolish thing. I mean, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. There, I'll use something from my youth. Everybody has something to offer.
Is there one exhibit you'd really like to have that you don't have?
No. What I'd like to have is a better armed forces. I'd like to really have that brought up because these people that's why we're here. These people who actually sacrificed the time in their lives to let us say the things we can say even now. If you look at what's going on in government, we are fortunate enough, because of the people who have gone before in the armed forces, that we can say these things, that we can protest. And I really would like to expand on that with the different wars and how Rock Springs has been a part of that, but also the people who have contributed to that. I'm a big proponent of that.
Those people that made us who we are today.
That's exactly right. It made it possible for us to be who we are today.
We're starting to run out of time. Any final comments? Any final thoughts?
Please come down to the museum. We're always there. Give us a call if you want some information. We do something that's a little bit different. We have a large collection of photos collected through the years, and we're happy to copy those for you. The more people realize where we come from, again, the more we know where we can go, where we're not to make the mistakes, hopefully.
Our guest on Dateline today has been Rock Springs Historical Museum Coordinator Bob Nelson. Bob, thanks for coming in this morning.
Thank you, and I hope to see everyone who's listening.
I'll be back with my take on today's program and a look at our guest for next week after this message.
Hey, at our startup, my team and I move at the speed of tech 24/7. Bottom line, I just want the news that matters. So where do I turn? My local radio stations. I want to hear from people who live and work in my town, people I know and trust. For the best entertainment, sports, news, weather, and traffic, anytime, anywhere, I stay local. Support your local stations. Text RADIO to 52886. Furnished by the NAB and this station. Message and data rates may apply. Reply stop to opt out.
Now, this is my take. Edmund Burke famously said, "Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it." One of the great treasures of Sweetwater County in southwest Wyoming is the Rock Springs Historical Museum. Coal miners, railroad workers, cattle and sheepmen, ranchers, energy workers, good guys and bad guys, notable men and women, they all converged in the shadow of White Mountain along the banks of Kilpecker Creek. Their lives, times, and stories are our history, and a rich, colorful history it is. The next time you find yourself with a few spare moments, stop by the Rock Springs Historical Museum and treat yourself to a visit of Rock Springs the way it was. And that's my take. This is your host, Tom Ellis, with an invitation to join us next Sunday when our guest will be Janessa Meredith of the Sweetwater Joint Travel and Tourism Board on Dateline, Wyoming.
Dateline Wyoming is a public affairs presentation of WYO Radio News presented every Sunday at this time, highlighting community issues and events that shape our lives here in southwest Wyoming. Views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WYO Radio ownership, management, or that of our sponsors. Time will be made available for responsible dissenting opinion. Audio copies of this program will be available each Monday following the program's airtime on Sunday at youtube.com/WYO Radio.